Hi, and welcome to Voices from Acudemy. I am Shameem Saidoo, your host, and with me, Yousouf Neetoo. For this edition of Voices from Acudemy, we are more than pleased to welcome one of our many partner trainers, Suk Gill, aka the Sales Coach.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
As we previously announced, each session will be covering topics in relation to adult education. For our webcast today, we will be discussing a few topics regarding the sales training. Therefore, Suk, tell us a bit about yourself and where does the concept of sales coach come from?
So a little bit about myself. My name is Suk Gill. I'm 37 years young. I'm from a little town in Buckinghamshire called Beaconsfield. So give you a bit of intro to myself, first of all, so you know kind of my background. Then I'll go on to a little bit about the sales coach and where that's kind of come from. So as I mentioned, my background is financial services. I spent the best part of 12 years within financial services. And I like to call it, I was in the wrong industry for 12 years because I was a face-to-face salesperson. I was also on the telephone as well selling. And I also headed up a sales team for around 5 years. And during that time, you know, as a sales manager stroke head of sales, there's two things you look at, and that's the performance and the development of your team. But as well as that, you also look at the money coming into the business and as a business, how much profitability and analyzing some of the stats. I spend 99.9% of my time developing and improving the performance of my team. And that quickly made me realize that I needed to move into more of a training role. And hence that I set up the sales coach in November 2017. So that's the kind of a little bit of background to myself. So I've done an economics degree, followed the financial services industry for a number of years, but inevitably it was always about becoming a trainer. I'm a passionate enthusiastic about helping, developing others get better at what they do. And that's kind of my purpose really as a sales trainer stroke sales coach. So that's a little bit of introduction to myself. Us as a business, we set up in November 2017. The name sales coach, it comes from something that I'm really passionate about, and that's coaching as opposed to training. And from my perspective, there's this significant difference between the two. And that's why I thought it would be a good idea to set up for something that I truly passionately believe in. I'm also a part-time tennis coach as well. So that's where the real passion for coaching as opposed to training comes from. And there is a slight difference. Coaching is enabling others to get the results you want them to get to, right? And that's where I was keen and so passionate about setting up a business, a coaching business as such.
Excellent, Suk. So what made you start in tennis coaching as well? That's an interesting point. It's rather different to teaching in education.
Yeah. And it's a good question, Yousouf, and I hate to admit it, but the only way you qualify to become a part-time tennis coach is when you fail as a tennis player. And that's exactly what I did. I was top 50 UK, and that's about as good as it got, to be honest. So my early childhood from the age of seven years old up to about 21, it was my dream to become a professional tennis player. And I played in all the circuits around the UK. I also did some training abroad as well. So I was, like I said, I was as good as it got. I was top 50 nationally, but that's nowhere near good enough on an international level. So when you fail as a tennis player, you've got, from my perspective, I left the tennis academy for a number of years. I left the tennis circuit and I didn't go back to tennis until I was about 27, 28. And I then qualified to become a part-time tennis coach. I did all of my kind of exams and the coaching qualifications you have to do. And, there is some real similarity. And that's why I talk about my tennis quite a lot. There is a lot of similarity between being a tennis coach and kind of being a sales coach and being a trainer as well. There is a lot of crossover in terms of what's important for the learner's perspective. So whether it's adult learning, whether it's coaching or teaching children, there is absolute crossover between the two. So yes, the background is whether you look at it as a failure or as a positive, it was top of the UK, and that's why I went into coaching after that when I kind of failed in my pursuit of becoming a professional tennis player.
Top 50 UK, mate. It's still, it's an achievement. you moved from tennis to then teaching. But then at the same time, I assume you were still working in the financial sector whilst coaching, or was this after doing the tennis?
So during my career within financial services, I came to almost like a crossroad, Yousouf, in terms of my career. So I got to I was as a consultant out in the field. I was selling investments and pensions to financial intermediaries, and it got to the stage where I kind of lost that little bit of love with the financial service industry. I was selling on my own a lot of the time, spending a lot of time by myself. That's when I decided to actually pursue a career as a tennis coach, and I did it for around 6 months before deciding that it just wasn't enough of a challenge, if that makes sense. I'm one of these people that needs to be challenged. My career and all my hobbies all lead me towards being someone that needs to be challenged, that constantly needs that to be coming out of my comfort zone as much as possible. And as a tennis coach, I did it for 6 months, but a couple of reasons why I decided to then leave it. The main reason being from a money perspective, and also that challenge perspective as well. So I then went to manage a team. I set up a brand new sales team from scratch in the city for another company. So that's the kind of the reasoning behind it. I kind of went into tennis, and then actually I learned a lot from the tennis coaching, and then I was able to implement some of that into my manager's role with a company called Partnership, who were selling annuities within the pensions market.
You brought in the hands-on experience, and then essentially whatever you picked up along the way, you bought it and created a new team. In terms of, you mentioned 2017, the sales coach essentially was born. How has the journey been?
It's been really, really interesting, Yousouf, from the moment, and to give you a bit of personal background to myself. So I set up in November 2017, and my initial mission was to focus on the website, the brands, the image, everything that I could around the sales coach. But that came to an abrupt halt when I decided to propose to my now wife in February. So I proposed to her, and then I realized how much it costs to actually have an Indian wedding. Cost, and I even stumble now with the words, but yes, the amount of cost involved in an Indian wedding, which it shifted my approach to my business with immediate impact. So I went from wanting 6 to 9 months to set up a brand, set up the image, set up the website, all this kind of stuff that you need with a new venture, a new business. And then I went on to just trying to get some work, right? And actually get paid, to pay for this wedding. So it was a really interesting journey, right? So in my first full year, I caught the best part of 45 flights, traveling all around the world, delivering training, sales training, a number of different other areas as well. Those flights included Asia, Africa, the Americas, Australia. So I quickly found myself going from, working in the city and going day in, day out, going into London, to pretty much traveling all around the world, meeting loads of different people, working with so many different businesses as well. So the exposure it gave me was unbelievable. The life experience it gave me as well was unbelievable. I'm quite a passionate and keen traveler as it is, but now it just meant I was traveling so much more in my first year, delivering training. And I'm passionate and so enthusiastic about training, development and coaching that, the journey's been amazing. It's been absolutely incredible. And in time getting married, as well as dealing with having to almost ask the wife if I can go on all these trips around the world. And to be fair to her, it's been really supportive with that, which has really, really helped me to grow as a business. So I quickly became a global recognized name and delivering my coaching. And so that's kind of how it started up and set up in terms of exposure around the world, different industries, different companies that I've worked for. I've done quite a few keynotes keynote speeches as well now over this time. So my role and my job has varied quite a lot, and not just in terms of the different topic areas I now cover as a trainer, but also the different environments that I'm training and coaching from one-to-one up to, I think the biggest one I've done is 150 people in a keynote speak for a day. So the role and the business has kind of evolved quite a lot, I think.
That's very nice to hear from you. Yousouf, we should try to negotiate some free tennis courses. What do you think? Yeah?
I would never charge Yousouf any tennis coaching. Acudemy have been a partner of mine as well, as I talk about my journey, along. You guys have been fantastic. I've done quite a good substantial amount of work as you tried to build me into your kind of business plans going forward, right? Around a different area around communication and sales and management. All these areas I think are quite important. So I'd never ever charge for a tennis lesson.
That's great to hear from you, Suk.
Okay.
The word sales coach says it all, but let me ask you, Suk, what is the specialism areas of the sales coach?
Yeah, so I've kind of broken, and I've been asked this question quite a lot, and it's changed so much just because of the number of courses, like I mentioned earlier, a number of different courses that I've run around the world, and kind of built exposure and built more and more material in different areas that I can cover. But I break it down into 3 areas, and I can go into these 3 areas in a bit more detail if required. The first one is sales. It's in the name, sales. It's my background. It's a big passion of mine. It's what I've done. I've got a lot of insights and stories and genuine messages around sales. So within sales covers so many different areas. The second area is leadership and management. Having worked as a manager, leading a sales team, developing new sales teams, that's another area where I feel like I can provide genuine, true insight. And the third area is I call it communication skills, being able to communicate effectively. This is a soft skills side of things, being able to communicate effectively, whether it's with team members internally, managing conflict, dealing with feedback. Communication as a whole, presentation skills sits under that as well. So those are the 3 areas. I don't know if there's if you want me to go into a bit more detail in any of those 3 areas. From my perspective, they're the core areas that I specialize in as a trainer.
So what would you say over the last few years, which areas have grown or have you seen the most demand for out of the topics you just listed?
It's a really tough and interesting question, right? Because it's changed significantly, not just because of my experience, but initially I went into sales as my main core area, hence the name, the business, the name's the sales coach. What I've seen over time is that communication skills, soft skills, and management and leadership have grown so much. The sales has always been quite high in my business, but what I've seen now is effective communication has been absolutely crucial. So whether people are presenting internally or externally to clients, that is, it's a fundamental area. And a lot, we're in the business of influence, right? Any communication area, I think, is crucial to it links into sales really, really well. But from my perspective, leadership and management, and the core areas around leadership management I found is dealing with conflict, dealing with challenging situations, how to manage the right behaviors. At the moment, right now, it's how to manage remotely. So those key areas have been quite important, as well as communication skills. I've done a lot of work around presentation skills and, simple things like active listening, being able to adapt your style. I've done a lot of work, Yousouf, just in the last 9 months or so. A lot of communication and management stuff has been focused around personality styles. And what I've been doing a lot of work around, that's grown so much just because it's helping people to learn, to understand, to build empathy and understand the different communication styles everyone else has. Because a big tip that I always give is that it's great to communicate in the style that you think is right, that feels natural to you, but you've got to be able to understand another person's perspective and how they like to receive communication. That's what the strongest communicators do really, really well. So as I said, it was sales to begin with. Now I'm now seeing more management leadership. and communication skills, which covers so many different areas. I'm now spending a lot more time on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it also shows that especially companies are becoming more involved in terms of their leadership and management styles as well. It really depends on the company ethos and how they're looking to grow their teams. But we've also seen a huge increase in that sort of course demand and popularity as well, which is very interesting.
I think so. I think businesses in any industry are realizing the importance of being able to effectively communicate. And the situation we're in right now, communication is absolutely everything. It's so critical in how people are managing, how people are communicating, not being able to see each other face to face. So I see that growing more and more, within businesses. And, I do a lot of work on motivation and how being able to motivate your employees. And it all kind of stems from right at the top is kind of communication, right? If we can do that bit well. And I do a lot of work with leaders and senior leadership teams to work out how to communicate best practice, what good looks like. There's so many different areas that I focus on with the senior leadership team to not only communicate to their clients, which is sales inevitably, right? But also communicating to their team members.
Suk, you did touch on different aspect of training.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. From your experience of the field, you will agree with me that training needs to be dynamic and innovative each time. How do you go along with this, and what do you enjoy about the training?
Okay, good question. So the first question around how do I adapt and to the dynamic engagement and the changing world. The first thing, when I work with businesses, I spend a bit of time, what I call discovery, right? So truly understanding what good looks like from them, from all their team members. What is it they want to achieve? What are the outcomes that they want to get from a training session? And a lot of the time I work with the senior leaders to create a bespoke training plan that works for them. Okay, that's the first step. But there is another crucial step, and that is, for me, a trainer is only worth their salt if they're able to totally adapt and change once they're in that room. And what I mean by this, Shameem, is something I think that's absolutely crucial, is that we've got to be comfortable and confident enough to throw away some of the stuff that we were planning to do as a trainer. And what I mean by this is that depending on the audience, depending on the audience and how they learn and how they take information in, will absolutely change my dynamic of a training session. Because I might have a training plan around how I'm going to run each session and do it minute by minute. But my view is that we need to be comfortable to throw that out the window and be able to say, actually, I need to adapt, I need to change because I've got a certain type of learner in here. I've got different types of learners in here. So engagement for me, and having that engagement and that excitement in a training session, is being able to recognize the different styles and being able just to very, very quickly shift and adapt what your training plan was, if that makes sense. And something I do at the start of each training session, like I said, I speak to senior leaders about what they want to get out of the training, what's most impactful for them. I get them to ask their teams as well. And then even on the day of any training session, I spend a bit of time understanding objectives, what they want to get, crucially what's going to be most critical for them when they walk out of that training room. They've got those 2 or 3 things that are going to make the biggest difference. So it's about being able to shift and adapt as quickly. And there's in a dynamic, you use the word dynamic, you've got to be dynamic as a trainer, I believe anyway. I think gone are the days where you kind of go in there and just deliver a set structure of a training plan. Well, in my view, that sometimes loses engagement because it's not a shared agenda. It's a kind of a one-way approach, the trainer going with their approach. Like I mentioned, my purpose, I'm passionate, enthusiastic about helping develop others get better at what they do in their careers. So that's my purpose. So that's what I enjoy most. One of the things I share at the start of every training session, if you've ever been on it, I always say to everyone in that session to challenge me as much as they possibly can, because that's what I enjoy most. And I know it sounds really strange and really weird, but as a trainer, the more challenge and the more questions and almost not arguments, but those difficult, challenging information, if I've shared some kind of theory, some kind of idea, I really, really need and want someone to push back on it, because I'm passionate about what they do with the training outside of the four walls that I'm training in. That makes sense? So the more they challenge, the more they push back on it, the more chance we have of trying to enable them to use some of the ideas that I talk about. So for me, the passion is helping and developing others, but I also love and enjoy when people, they start to use some of the ideas that I share, whether it's management, whether it's sales, whether it's communication styles. They use something that I've shared. That for me is the ultimate as a trainer. I think there's a bigger buzz out there. The feedback forms are great that you get back at the end. But for me, when someone messages you afterwards on LinkedIn or any other platforms and says, "So do you know what? I've learned this, or I tried this and it worked, or it didn't work, let me try this." That's for me is what I really enjoy most. But I also enjoy being up there, interacting with people and being able to, deal with, sometimes people come in and have a very different view and opinion of training. And I love it when they leave with a totally different perspective on what training actually is compared to what their thinking is. So I love to shift that mindset a lot, that fixed mindset to a growth mindset.
This has been the most asked question around, I think, regarding the current COVID-19 situation.
Yeah.
How did COVID has affected you and the business in general?
It's a really, really big question. And I think the best way to answer that is, let me just talk through my journey over the last couple of months and what I've been up to. So I mentioned at the start of this call is the fact that I went straight into training rather than spending time building and developing my brand and the business. Well, COVID-19 has initially given me a bit of time to be able to focus on other areas of my business. As a one-man band, one of the challenges you have is being able to be the marketing person, the admin person, the receptionist, the salesperson. And it's just, I spent a lot of time now over the last couple of months in a number of different other areas of the business. Number one being the website, number two being the social media exposure and my approach to that. And thirdly, I have still been training. So initially we saw a real quiet period for a couple of weeks where, clients weren't in a position to really make any decisions. They were kind of waiting to see what was going to happen. What I've then tried to do is start to think about what is it I can focus on other areas of the business. But more recently, I've actually invested in not only myself through my own knowledge and picking up, learning new courses and new ideas to run training sessions. I've also invested in a bit of simple technology to make a difference for me, because I do a lot of virtual training courses because I do a lot of travel around the world. I run one-to-ones when I'm back in the UK with them. But I invested in some lighting, a decent camera, a decent microphone, which hopefully you can hear from here. It's made a difference to the training I'm delivering virtually. Okay, so that's been a big shift, being able to run a training session with 10, 12 people in a session. And it's good, from my perspective, I quickly realized that these areas are really, really important. People need to be able to see you. They need to be able to hear you really, really clearly. It shouldn't feel like that they're not in a training session, if that makes sense to me. It's got to, just because it's virtual doesn't mean it's less of a training session. So I've had to adapt and adjust my style and approach. Number one, in terms of the business, like I said. The second area is actually the training sessions and having the right lighting, having the right tone. These things are really, really important to drive engagement. So yes, there has been some changes, and I expect there to continue to be more challenges and change as the months go on. But that for me has been the two areas that I've had to adapt as a trainer. The other area is when I'm speaking to clients, I've had to not so much change my role, but be more mindful of other things with the client's perspective. And that is that their buying process is changing and it's evolving very, very quickly. So my role has been to try and help them through that with some of my clients, helping them understand their own sales process, but also their current buying process when it comes to training and stuff, because I have to be mindful of that when I'm now approaching clients and speaking to them because of the COVID situation.
What was the feedback like for the virtual session that you mentioned that you carried out?
I don't want to sound big-headed, but they really enjoyed it, Yousouf. It made a huge difference for them. It was the first time that they were running a virtual session. It was on management and leadership. So it was how it was split, and I think that'd be quite useful for you. How it was split up, it was quick 3 bite-sized sessions throughout a day for an hour and a half each, with an hour break in between. So that's how it was structured. The feedback was great because one of the things you can do with some of the webinars is to be able to put people into separate groups. I also used a flip chart. I had videos in there as well. So what I was doing is adapting to each learning style within a virtual session. So the feedback was I was really happy, put it that way. I was really happy with some of the feedback that I got. They didn't feel like that they missed out because it was virtual. They actually feel like they engaged and learned a little bit more. And there's certain techniques that I continue to try to do to keep people engaged, because it's all about engagement, Yousouf. I think the stats are coming out around how the percentage of people that stay engaged in a virtual meeting, virtual training session, and it's 21% of people do. Everyone else gets really distracted by it, right? Which I think is a challenge and can be an issue, right? So that's why I've been focusing on certain areas, but the feedback overall was strong. It was good.
That's an interesting stat that you mentioned there, Suk, because I was literally going to go on to the next question saying, how do you see the landscape of training changing in the next, between now and the end of the year in terms of face-to-face and virtual?
And it's a good question. There is so much unknown. That's one of the issues. There is so much unknown right now, and every training company's got their own view and perspective. The way I look at it is trainers, we need to be comfortable to be able to deliver virtual training for the rest of this year. Some may say that's quite a harsh perspective, quite a pessimistic perspective, but I think we need to put ourselves in the shoes of some of our clients and start to think about actually any of their teams back at work, how comfortable do they feel? Would they want someone external coming in right now? And my view is not necessarily that they probably won't want that right now, right? So if we're able to continue to use the current landscape of being virtual, but being virtual in an interactive and engaging way. And like I said, you said that 21% is sticking in my mind so much. So what I've done is, when we talk about communication, body language and tone play a huge part. 93% of impact on the audience is body language and tone. So what I've done is made sure that and be comfortable that every part of my session has me on a video so they can see the top half of me. The other thing that I've done is talk about my microphone and stuff to make sure people can hear every single word as well. So as trainers, we've got to evolve. My view is that it's a real challenge to keep people engaged on a virtual training session, but there are tips, hints, and ways to be able to do it. So I do see more businesses taking up the virtual world, but at the end of the day, there's nothing I enjoy more than a face-to-face training session, because for me, it's when you're in that room and people are living and breathing, that training session makes the biggest difference, I think. And if they're involved, communicating with each other face to face, there's certain things you can't. I don't think you can get from a virtual session, but that's that human interaction with people. But as we evolve and adapt and being able to be stronger virtually, I think me personally as a trainer, I've improved more so over the last 2 months than I did probably the last 6 months. And that's because I've had to really spend more time thinking about the learner a little bit more and the journey that they're going on in a virtual element.
Yes, I think we've all had to adapt and embrace that the current situation and the pandemic has caused us to rethink and re-strategize in terms of delivery and how we can essentially continue in terms of business.
What will be the top 3 tips that you can give to anyone in sales? I would say for any newbie, for example.
For a new person, and there are so many tips, right? Few really simple tips when it comes to sales sales right now. And the first one is spend less time talking about yourself and all the great things your product and service can do, but spend more time letting the customer talk, understanding the customer's perspective, understand what's going on in their world right now. So that's the first big tip. A lot of the time we go in with our approach and we talk about how great we are as a business and how long we've been around for, and all the great products and services and how we can help so many great companies do all this stuff. But we need to start by reducing something called self-interest and making it more about the customer. So that's the first big tip. The second one is, and it's a really simple tip, and it links into the previous one, and that is listen to understand, don't listen to respond. So the majority of the time, us as salespeople, actually us as human beings, right, when we're listening to someone, we're not truly listening to understand, we're listening to ask our next question. We're not truly listening to everything that is being said and not interrupting, which comes into active listening. Being able to truly listen to understand your client's perspective, I think, is absolutely crucial. So that's the second big tip that I would give you. And the third one, something that I've been thinking about a lot more over time, and it's almost like a 4-point attack. So going into any client conversation or meeting right now in COVID world, so this is linked to COVID, a lot has shifted and a lot has changed for them right now. So before going into that interaction with a client, ask yourself 4 questions. What are the challenges my customer or my client's facing right now? What do they care about? What are their concerns? And what's changed for them? Okay, so this is an activity I've started to run more and more now in my training sessions. If you can start to think about those 4 questions, but not with your company hat on. So if I'm the sales coach, I wouldn't think about it as a trainer. I would think entirely from the other person's perspective. So those 4 areas, all the challenges they're facing right now, what do they care about, what's changed for them, and what are the concerns they've got right now in their world and their job role. Because this is where value comes in. People use the term value quite a lot, and they use it quite loosely. But bringing true value is everything that sits outside of your product, your services. For example, me as a sales coach, everything that I bring is a value of clients is not going to be anything that I can do from a training perspective. It's everything else that sits around there. So those are my big 3 tips. One's linked to COVID right now, and that's by answering those 4 questions. The other one I mentioned was listen to understand, not to respond. And the other one is making it less about yourself, more about the customer by reducing self-interest, making it more about your customer.
Excellent tips there, Suk.
Well, that's all for today's episode of Voices from Acudemy. Thank you for listening. It has been a pleasure for both of us, me and Yousouf, to have Yousouf today on our webcast.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate your time.
Join us again on our next webcast when we will be discussing more about different fields of training. Make sure you do visit us at acudemy.com and sign in to our mailing list. Thank you from your hosts, Shameem and Yousouf. Cheers. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.